Welcome to the Take the North podcast. This is David Haugh from the Mully and Haugh Show on 670 The Score. Dan Wiederer from the Chicago Tribune covers the Bears and also works for 670 The Score. We are here this off-season week, just the last time that we'll have an off week this season. And certainly, Dan, it's going to be weird. The first time in a long time we've not had football to look forward to over the weekend.
Well, you're shooting down the Pro Bowl so quickly.
Oh, that's right. It is the Pro Bowl. But is that a game or is it those just activities? Those are kind of activities.
Flag football.
Flag football. Yeah, and so I think there's still some obvious some staff moves being made. There's some coaches being hired. Dan Quinn hired in Washington. You've got Mike McDonald and Seattle.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of a surprise there. The big news, Dan, let's start here because I don't think we've talked about it on this podcast, but your reaction to Ben Johnson returning to the Lions as offensive coordinator.
Yeah, my reaction was, whoa, because I think the assumption really since around Thanksgiving was that Ben Johnson was the hottest candidate in this cycle, that there were going to be more than a half dozen openings to choose from. There ended up being 8, and he wound up choosing to stay with the Detroit Lions. And the last time that a coach chose to stay with the Detroit Lions rather than take an upward mobility coaching move is never. And so you've got a coach here that obviously is striving and citing unfinished business to try to finish off the deal for the Detroit Lions and get them to the Super Bowl. But you also have a guy that probably sees a window of opportunity that should stay open for him. If he doesn't have any sort of notable regression with his Lions team and his Lions offense in 2024, there's going to be a whole nother wave of jobs open next cycle, and you'd have to imagine that he'd be a prominent candidate on that list as well. But for the Bears' sake, it's a whoa moment because it is one of those things where we expected the Lions to have to readjust and reconfigure and have to go through some obstacles to sustain their success, and they won't have to do that.
We expected the Jared Goff regression. We expected the step back in offensive production because Ben Johnson wouldn't be there to out-scheme every defensive coordinator in his path. And now he's back. I think I found myself reacting honestly. Everyone has the right to navigate his own career.
Yeah.
But I was surprised, and I think that I looked at it from the standpoint of their 32 jobs. Not all of them are created equally, and certainly not all of them are great opportunities. And they're fraught with peril, right? As they say, Washington might not have been a great situation. Seattle might not have offered the job. But Dan, I don't know that you can count on, if you're Ben Johnson, I wouldn't want to take the risk that I'm going to be just as attractive and appealing and the things are going to fall into place as well as they are now a year from now. Things change. It's the NFL. You don't know that you're going to be the hot coordinator next year. Somebody else may fill that role. So I was surprised that a 37-year-old with a chance to become a head coach in the NFL passed on that opportunity.
I understand the surprise, and I do agree with you that there are times in this league where someone's name is a hot head coaching prospect, and then 5 years later they're nowhere to be found, and you're like, well, what happened? Where did that go sideways? That said, I do think that there is something to trying to find an opportunity, particularly when you're as young as Ben Johnson is, that feels like the right fit for you. And it's okay to bet on yourself. It's okay to be choosy. And now you just have to back it up and make sure that you keep yourself in that mix when the time comes. And obviously did a good job this year, particularly in the playoffs, of compartmentalizing and going through a whole wave of job interviews, but still doing a pretty good job of coordinating that Lions offense through the month of January, through the 3 postseason games that they played.
The other nuggets of news have come out of maybe the Senior Bowl week of practice in Mobile, Alabama. Kerry Joseph talked to reporters. You get a sense of who he is. There are a lot of prospects down there that Bears fans and draft nicks are looking at. The big center from Oregon that has maybe played himself or practiced his way into the first round. All kinds of receivers and defensive backs and edge rushers. But we'll wait and see what happens. Dan, I think the one thing that is interesting as we continue to examine every morsel of information and look for clues in the Caleb Williams, Justin Fields debate in Chicago. Albert Breer from MMQB reported in a mailbag that he thinks that that's a higher percentage that the Bears of a chance that the Bears will keep the draft pick and take Caleb Williams. But he added that if the Bears are going to trade Justin Fields, he would expect it to be by early March. We know Ryan Poles acted quickly last year. I wonder if that is realistic. You also have to remember the league year doesn't start until closer to mid-March. You can agree on deals, but they're not official until the league year starts. But I wonder what your reaction was to, number one, that reporting, and secondly, what would be the logic behind going sooner rather than later?
So I'll start here in a below the surface level where I think it's very important to choose words properly here. And I don't know that reported is the right verb in this case. I think it was, said or guessed in a mailbag. Because I think it is important to distinguish between what is someone's kind of educated opinion and something that is as thoroughly reported out. Albert Breer obviously, had to deal with some blowback in December when he had in a mailbag said that Kevin Warren was looking to basically get his fingerprints all over all the decisions that the Bears were going to make with their coaching staff and their general manager position when the season ended. And that ended up not being the case. And Albert essentially said, look, you got to be able to distinguish between something that I answer in a mailbag and something that I report out with sourced information and things. It's harder and harder to do these days. So I'll just put that out there first. I do think that the timeline is sensible, but it may not be fully practical for some of these teams that may be interested in Justin Fields. As we've talked about previously, the teams that are in the market for a quarterback have to explore what their options are for a quarterback. And unless Justin Fields is the top choice for several teams, some of these teams, as we've talked about, may want to go through the draft process and figure out what they think about the quarterbacks in this draft. And if you sit there and you go, well, wait a second, we really like Justin Fields, but now that we're doing our homework on the quarterback class, there's a guy that could be the fourth or fifth quarterback off the draft board. We could get him in the mid-teens. We could, finagle our way up there and find our way into a different situation. You've got to explore that. And so I think all of these things with these trade talks are fluid because they're so dependent on individual teams, their desires, the things that they have at their disposal to work with. And then it's just all about when push comes to shove. And that's always a guessing game in this league because sometimes it happens earlier than you expect. Sometimes it happens later.
It's a very good point and very well put. And shame on me because I do know better. And reporting and speculating or suggesting, it is about the semantics and it is about the word choice and the verb choice. And I know guys like Albert Breer, who've been around a very long time, do choose their words very carefully, as they should, because they know. And I should know. So it wasn't reported. It certainly is more informed speculation as anything. And I think that's smart.
It's still notable. It's still
notable because if it's in the context of league conversations and things he's hearing, then I think you want to brace yourself for that possibility. I also think that there will be teams out there. There could be a team out there that wants to get its own quarterback situation settled before going into free agency, so they know what they have, what they maybe can or can't spend on, and what they're going to do to prepare for the draft.
Yeah, so in that case, you kind of have to go through every division and figure out what is the quarterback stability at each given franchise and how motivated would they be to react quickly rather than play the waiting game on some of this and sort through it. Obviously, teams are not going to be able to get into the practice setting until May, and so you've got time to figure those things out. I would say this, that one of the sentiments that seems to have mushroomed up this week as league folks have gathered together in Mobile, Alabama, and you're kind of hearing it from a lot of different pockets, is the consensus. And again, it's just an educated guess by people around the league that the Bears are going to take a quarterback at number one. Yeah. There seems to be less and less momentum built up in the direction of, you got to give Justin one more crack in year 4 and see what he can do with it, as opposed to, okay, there's a pretty good quarterback class here. There's a pretty good quarterback at the top of that class right now by most accounts. And the sentiment around the league is that the Bears presumably will take what has been put in front of them and not get too cute with it and take the top prospect in Caleb Williams.
And I think that will only continue. Daniel Jeremiah, the really good analyst from the NFL Network. We've talked about him before. He's the one who coined the term confetti test. He was quoted as recently as Thursday afternoon as saying he expects the Bears to take Caleb Williams, and those kinds of things will just continue to be out there to be kind of digested by Bears fans, like it or not. This is probably the way that they're likely to go, but there's still a lot of time left.
Yeah, while we're on this topic, I'm just going to give you a little tease here, and it'll push people toward ChicagoTribune.com on Friday for a progress report that we did on Justin Fields. We've talked about it previously on this podcast. Before the season started, we set out statistical goals for Justin Fields across 7 categories: passing yards, ball security, durability, sacks, explosive plays, clutch play, direction, juice, and momentum as the last one. And I went through and looked at the goals that we set, which, remember, these were goals that were modest goals. They were goals that were supposed to be checkpoints that would have convinced Ryan Poles and his front office staff and Matty Eberflus and his coaching staff to stay the course with Justin Fields if he was able to meet a majority of these. And in the 12 statistical goals that we set out for Justin Fields, I had 4 failed to meet expectations, 4 needs improvement, and 4 met expectations. 0 exceeded expectations. And so you have your little report card that you bring home at the end of the year, and your parents look at it and they go, wow, this wasn't quite as sufficient as we wanted. And again, those goals were set not at a level that would have put Justin in the MVP conversation, because you and I were among the first to say that talk was outlandish back in the summer. Well, now you go through it. I'll give you an example of one. Justin talked about being the first Bears quarterback in team history to throw for 4,000 yards in a season. He didn't pass 2,000 until Christmas Eve. Okay. We talked about having at least 7 games this season with 225 passing yards and at least 3 with 300 plus. Well, he had 3 games with 225 passing yards and only 1 with 300 plus. You know what the sack rate has been. You know what the fourth quarter rating has been. When you look at that and you use kind of that objective, sober lens to go over that report card, I don't know how Ryan Poles and the group at Halas Hall could look at it any differently and say, boys, we need to start having a talk about what our quarterback board looks like.
And I think that for people who will hear that and read that when it comes out on Friday morning, they'll quickly add, well, he missed some games. He was injured. 5 games he was injured. But that was part of the equation.
Durability, needs improvement. We set the goal at 15 starts. He made 13.
So that's all part of the equation. When you look at being around guys like Jared Goff, for example, you look at his durability over the years, and that's what you're looking for: 15, 16, 17 games a year, season in, season out.
Let me give you this last one, because this was another one that I think is worth emphasizing on this podcast. Justin finished the 2023 season getting sacked 44 times with a 10.6% sack rate. He was improved down the stretch, and it was 8.7% sack rate over his final 7 starts. But he was 31st in the league, ahead of only Zach Wilson and Ryan Tannehill in sack rate. His sack rate, again, was 10.6%. Tyson Bagent, the games that he played, sack rate of 3.4%. Over 3 seasons, Fields has a sack rate of 12.4%, and the 6 other Bears quarterbacks that have played during that span have a sack rate of 6.0%. So Justin has been more than twice as likely to be sacked playing with the same supporting cast and the same offensive line as 6 other quarterbacks, which include Tyson Bagent, Tim Boyle, Nathan Peterman, Andy Dalton, and Trevor Siemian, and at least one other.
You know that if you have that information and access to it, that the Bears do too. And that's the thing, is that you're not unearthing things that aren't at the disposal for everybody making or trying to make an objective, form an objective opinion on a quarterback situation. And you're not piling on. It's just out there to be gathered.
Yeah, no question. And so, look, it was illuminating for me to go back and look at the goals we set, and then see, the categories that he did meet them in. He did pretty well. Well, obviously, rushing yards was we set a modest bar there, and he met that perfectly, right where we wanted him to be. The interception and fumble totals came down this year to a level that was that gave you some encouragement, and then the explosive completions, pretty much dead on. We asked for 45 completions of at least 20 yards and at least 7 touchdown passes from outside the red zone. He got exactly 45 explosive completions and 8 touchdown passes from outside the red zone. So that was a category where he met expectations and showed that growth that we were looking for.
So check that out Friday in the Chicago Tribune, chicagotribune.com, the Justin Fields report card, if you will, progress report, and there will be some very enlightening numbers and information. All right, let's take a look back. Speaking of the season that was, this is going to be a fun look back at our preseason predictions. You have pulled several categories. I am going to be ready to cringe at some of our reactions and see how good or bad we were. I'll let you take it from here. We have different categories to look at. Our preseason predictions from August or September of 2023.
Early September. And so, look, like we did this last year, it was a lot of fun. So we brought it back this year. We had predictions for the Bears and the NFL at large, just a half dozen categories that we went through. I thought it would be good to revisit those and then listen to some of the audio that we had in early September and then react to it in live action. So the first category was the Bears record. producer Adam Studzinski thought the Bears were going to go 8-9, which we were really impressed at the time that Adam held it in and set a realistic bar for the Bears and was able to do that. And you and I, David, both predicted the Bears to finish at 7-10. The Bears' final record was 7-10. Here's a little bit of a listen back to what we had to say at the time.
They win 7 to 9 games. That's a drastic improvement from a season ago when they were the worst team in football. Like, that would mean they got to the middle of the league. But what I'm really looking for is a win late in the season, or maybe even like 3/4 of the way through the season, where you say, I can see where they're going. Like, I can see where they get good from where they are now. And maybe it's a win against like Detroit in December or something like that. Or maybe it's a win in Green Bay to end the season where you say, yes, I can see it. I can see where they're going and how they've improved, and that a year from now we can predict playoffs. So hopefully 8 wins, but I'm really looking for that one little thing. I know that's a very specific ask.
So, David, you and I both got the record right, and then Studs can take his victory lap here on getting that December win over Detroit that showed us where this team could potentially go.
Yeah, I nailed that.
You did.
I'm not going to lie. I nailed that. I actually totally forgotten that I remember saying most of that, but I totally forgot that I specifically mentioned Detroit in there. So, yeah, that was pretty good on my part. I'm not going to lie.
Did you think that 8-9, when they started 0-4, that was going to look really ridiculous as a prediction?
No, I didn't think so. Because when they started 0-4, I was maybe it was just optimism. I was like, they can't possibly look this bad all season. And as we saw, their schedule really lightened up. So yeah,
the thing about picking them to go 7-10 is that when they go 7-10, you kind of do lose some of the right to rant and to rave about how, oh, this is terrible, this is awful, they need to change everything, because they're exactly where you thought they would be.
You're right. You're right about that. And then you have to kind of filter through and get through the nuance and figure out where the areas of improvement need to be and what they need to do next. The second category that we talked about in early September was the Bears MVP. We were unanimous on this one. We all thought that DJ Moore was going to be the guy that came in and carried this team to the MVP levels for the Bears' sake when the season began. And I think we probably would all agree as the season ends that probably registers as an MVP. We obviously, Montez Sweat and DJ and Jalen Johnson have something to say in that conversation. But here's a little bit of what we had to say about what DJ Moore could mean to the Bears back in September.
Look at that catch that he made against the Bills in the preseason finale. It's a basic play. Find a spot in the zone, catch it 15 yards down the field. Oh, now you're surrounded by 3 defenders. Okay, spin out the back door, get 24 more yards. Like, we're going to see a lot of that from DJ Moore this year.
I know. I can't disagree, because he is the most predictable offensive player. He's got to stay healthy. He can, more than any other person in that locker room, make Justin Fields better.
Not bad.
Pretty easy choice. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that you always worried about was the guy you expect to play the biggest role coming through and avoiding injury to play the biggest role. And he had a career year. Should have been probably rewarded with the Pro Bowl selection. Speaking of the Pro Bowl, but maybe next year, I think you could have made the argument, but there were some really good numbers from really good receivers. So DJ Moore, guy has to settle for being the Bears MVP, not a Pro Bowler.
And now he gets to reunite with Chris Beatty, his new receivers coach, who he had some experience with at Maryland back in his college days. So that'll be nice to see. Our third category was Breakout Player for the Bears in 2023. David went with first-round draft pick Darnell Wright. Studs and I went 1 round lower and took cornerback Tyreek Stevenson in this category. Both of us were bullish on what Stevenson had shown through training camp in the preseason. And here's some of the commentary from back in the late summer about what Tyreek Stevenson could be to this team.
Originally written down Kyler Gordon and thought, you know what, he's probably too advanced right now to be considered a breakout player in 2023. And I wrote down Tyreek Stevenson. I've got a piece coming in Friday, ChicagoTribune.com on Tyreek Stevenson. Love the way that this kid approaches things. He started off his youth career as an offensive lineman, transitioned over to linebacker, and then they needed him in a pinch to play cornerback. And he said his first year of playing cornerback in high school, he got tortured. And what did it make him do? it made him say, I want to be the best cornerback there is. And that tells you the wiring of this dude. He didn't run from failure, just as he hasn't run from failure during training camp, during preseason games. When he makes mistakes, he gets himself back up, and he plays with an aggression and a confidence mindset that is going to be helpful. Look, there's going to be bumps in the road this season for him. No question about it. There's going to be days where you go, man, that's a bad penalty. That's a bad coverage bust, and it just cost us. But that guy is going to be trending in the right direction to become a long-term starter in your secondary. I'm with Studs, Tyreek Stevenson.
That's a good call.
Trending in the right direction with an NFC Defensive Player of the Week award late in the year, right? That's a perfect piece of evidence of a trending in the right direction call.
Well, let's face it. They don't have any guarantee that Jalen Johnson is returning. Right now, that's likely. It's a definite maybe. They could tag him. What if they do? We know he's coming back for sure. The point is that Tyreek Stevenson right now is a starting cornerback, and he was in the capacity for much of his rookie season, but he's gotten to the point where you say those things and you don't really worry because he has earned the trust and he's playing at a very high level for a rookie.
Yeah, and so that should continue to bear out as we go forward. We offered our most disappointing prediction in September of who the player that would kind of fall short of expectations would be in 2023. I'll take an L here because I picked Tevin Jenkins, worried about the injury that kept him on injured reserve for the first month of the season. He came back and played really, really well for much of the season. David went with Khalil Herbert, which I think you could make an argument was a pretty good pick for how he produced in the third year of his stay with the Bears. And Studs had a hunch. Studs took Darnell Mooney, and he just had a hunch that there was just something that wasn't going to add up for Darnell Mooney in 2023. Here's what Studs had to say there.
I'm going to go with Darnell Mooney. I don't know why. I just don't have a good feeling about the kind of season he's going to have. And I maybe it's just because I want to see him in a game and prove that he's healthy. But I just don't, and I can't really put a reason on why I feel this way, but I feel like he's going to have a disappointing season. So that's all I got to say about it. Like Darnell Mooney is, and hopefully it's not so bad that they don't even bother extending him. But I mean, I just don't have a good feeling about it. I don't know why.
Good call. You probably never taken such little glee in being right.
Yeah, And I even remember just like trying to think of a most disappointing player and being like, again, as you heard, just a hunch about Darnell Mooney, but I didn't think it would be as bad as it ended up being. Like you heard me say, like I was hoping it wouldn't be so bad they're not going to extend him, but now I don't think there's any chance he's back next season. So
fascinating stuff coming up for Darnell Mooney as he walks into potentially free agency in a month to figure out what the market is for him. I would imagine that he'd probably be having to play on some sort of prove it deal in 2024. I also think there's a lot of people around the league that think he has a potential to have a quick bounce back and a new scenery and a new offense and with a structure around him that allows him to show off his gifts. It'd be really interesting to see where he goes in 2024.
One more question about Mooney. Do you think that you mentioned the new receivers coach, Beatty, you have a new offensive coordinator, you have, a new direction offensively, potentially with a new quarterback. Could Ryan Poles, who values the work ethic and professionalism, and let's face it, Mooney had one game where he talked about being lackadaisical, but he's not been a locker room problem. Could they give him a prove it deal? Could he be on a shorter term deal with the team that drafted him and try to invigorate his career?
Theoretically, yes, but then 1 year prove it deals usually land in the player's lap with the player choosing amongst where he wants to go. And he may want a new set of scenery, particularly if it means restarting completely here in Chicago. So we'll see where that goes. Okay, because the name of the podcast is Take the North, we always pick who's going to take the North when the season begins. You two guys were drinking the purple Kool-Aid back in August and September. Thought the Vikings were going to repeat as champs. I tried to warn you. That there was a group over in Motown that was going to do things. Here's the discussion about the Detroit Lions and their prospects for 2023.
Studs proved my point here, David, because when you talk to people everywhere, and in particular in Detroit, the only knock that people can come up with for this year's Lions is that they're the Lions. It's the helmets they wear, it's the jerseys they wear, it's the organization they play in. I get it. I totally understand it. January 5th, 1992, think of where you were on that day. That's the last time the Detroit Lions won a playoff game. So Studs makes perfectly rational arguments about prove it. I'm the see it to believe it guy. He's making the argument, see it to believe it. I get it. I understand it. But they look like the class of this division. Roster-wise, talent-wise, depth-wise, the direction they're headed. Last season's finish was significant in terms of the momentum that Dan Campbell and that group wanted to build with culture. And I think it's going to carry over, obviously, in a division that doesn't have Aaron Rodgers anymore. And they are going to go ahead, win 11 or 12 games and take this division.
Good call.
Taking a little bow here. Taking a little
Good
bow.
call. Yeah, that's a very, very nice bow. I also might remind you that I know they did win the division and they did win a playoff game.
And 12 games.
But the reason they're not in the Super Bowl is because
they're the Lions.
They're the Lions. Okay. they brought back Lionsing as a verb for one afternoon in San Francisco, or else they'd be playing in the Super Bowl. They blew a lead and they reverted to form.
And I just want to add on that I still can only pick a team with Jared Goff as their quarterback to go so far. I really like that's about the limit right there, what they did this year. Until I see it. I know he's played in the Super Bowl before, but he had the whole dive down and he's got a clear limit. The Bears turned him over like 7 times this year. Okay, I'm done.
Yeah, and Ben Johnson has belief in him and has some unfinished business to stay with in Detroit. So we'll see where that goes. So that leads us to the Super Bowl because the Lionsing allowed me to get my NFC champion correct. I had a Bengals 49ers Super Bowl pegged when the season began, so I get a half credit. Studs went with Bills and Eagles, with the Eagles winning it all. David, you also had the Eagles winning it all against the Bengals. And so we were kind of trying to figure out who was going to be on the Vegas stage on the last Sunday of the season, and really only got the 49ers out of that grouping there. But I thought it was notable to hear the discussion we had as we were sorting through all that. And another comment by Studs that just kind of sat there in the air for 4 months. And here's a listen to that.
I think the Eagles in the NFC will beat the Bengals in the AFC. And I'm not picking the Bills again because I think if you check back the last 5 years, I think I picked the Bills to get out of the AFC. So I'm not doing that again.
I had them last year. I think I had Bills Cowboys last year or something like that. But yeah, I get it. It's tough. It's a tough exercise. It's really tough. That AFC is absolutely stacked, and we don't even know where our
guys. It's like the AL East of the AFC.
Friend of the podcast, Aaron Rodgers. Where does his season end?
Well, and the ridiculous thing is none of us picked the Patrick Mahomes Chiefs, which means they'll probably win it again.
That's great. Studs, I think you win this round. You got 3 of the predictions pretty much right on the nose.
That last line, that was great. That was just great because here we are.
Well, yeah, I think that everyone probably learned it, like everyone, not just here on the pod, but like in the NFL, like we all learned a lesson this year, right? Like stop picking against the Chiefs no matter what. As long as that guy's there and he's healthy, then just put them in the Super Bowl and be wrong if they're not there. Like that's my prediction. I can already tell you my prediction next year for the AFC, Chiefs in the Super Bowl.
Well, it's like Jordan with the Bulls. I mean,
that's exactly what it is.
Daring people to pick against him and the team, and it doesn't really matter the supporting cast. The superstars, those guys who transcend everything else, find a way to persevere and make their team a championship caliber team. And you're seeing it this year. The Chiefs really aren't that good at all their spots. They've got Travis Kelce. They've got a pretty good defense. They've got a really good defensive coordinator. The receivers are pedestrian. The running backs are above average, but offensive line's protecting Mahomes. But it's all about Patrick Mahomes.
No question. And stepping up to those moments and meeting those moments. Just to hold myself accountable, I had to go on Twitter in week 1 and make my picks for all the divisions and then some of the awards around the league. And I got 5 of the 8 division champions right. But I took a lot of grief for 2 things that I put on Twitter, which I have to take accountability for. I picked the Carolina Panthers to get a wild card in the NFC, and I picked Bryce Young as my offensive rookie of the year. Got slaughtered at the time that I made the pick. I just picked the wrong rookie quarterback to make that meteoric leap. Had it been, you imagine the grief I would have taken if I had picked C.J. Stroud and to win Offensive Rookie of the Year and the Texans to make the playoffs back in September.
Oh
So
my gosh!
I'm giving myself a little bit of an out because I just picked the wrong quarterback, just like the Panthers did. I picked the wrong quarterback to make the huge leap as a rookie. But I will take that L, and I will take accountability for it, so people don't think that we only pull out our highlights.
If you would have picked C.J. Stroud and the Texans to get to the playoffs and he would be the Offensive Rookie of the Year, people would have thought you were crazy because there's no way that a rookie quarterback could be plopped into a team with a good defense and
that just won 3 games.
And
yeah.
a 3-game season, 3-win season with a defensive head coach. They're not going anywhere. How could you envision that?
Yeah, I wish had I gotten that one right, there would have been a Hong Kong ceremony for an entire episode here. But so it'd be, and off we go.
That's fun. Predictions are fun. And I want to we'll wrap up on this point because I'm kind of curious. You brought up the Texans, and it reminded me beyond our predictions and looking ahead, this hiring cycle. I mentioned what the Seahawks did. I mentioned Dan Quinn going to Washington with McDonald and Quinn, Raheem Morris in Atlanta. We see Sean McDermott keep his job in Buffalo. You've got Matt Eberflus in Chicago. Dan, in this offensive revolution with all the hot shot coordinators like Ben Johnson, like Bobby Slowick Jr., teams are, I mean, what's going on with this trend toward, I don't know if it's a trend, but there have been a lot of defensive-minded head coaches hired this cycle, and they joined several that have kept their jobs.
It's a good question, and I don't have a real concise or clear answer for you at this time. Probably worth looking into it. Also, you have to see how it plays out and how these guys do and where they're going to be. I think the one thing that has become more and more apparent the longer I've been in the league is how much quicker teams are willing to pull the plug on everything. You have that stat circulating around this month that there's been 0 offensive coordinators that have been in their role for longer than since 2021, right? And so when you have this turnover at that position, you don't have the depth of candidates that maybe you once had on the offensive side of the ball, and so it gets a little bit swirly, and there's people changing buildings every other year, and it's hard to get a full picture of what's happening here. It's really interesting. I've been waiting for Dan Quinn to get his next opportunity. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how he does in a revamped Washington organization. That guy is really, really well respected around the league. Obviously was within a quarter of winning a Super Bowl in Atlanta, and then things went haywire at the hands of Brady and Belichick. But that one's the last hire of the cycle is one that's really fascinating because I think he's got an opportunity to really get them some juice and momentum.
Also because typically you see change in styles from one coach fired to the next coach hired. They replaced in Washington Ron Rivera with Dan Quinn. Very similar profiles, guys who had come from previous head coaching experience, defensive-minded guys, similar personality types, and yet you don't see a big contrast in those two in terms of their approach to being a head coach.
Well, and they were the team that was also presumably hottest on the trail of Ben Johnson, and so that was a little curveball this week for that to go in that different direction. Dan Quinn, obviously a finalist for the Bears job a couple years ago, and now gets a chance to reboot in Washington.
I want to ask you one more question regarding the Packers, and we're talking about defensive coordinators. They made a very interesting hire. And this is not take the SEC or take the ACC or the Big Ten. This is not a college football podcast, but I do find it fascinating what's going on in college football and how, in this case, it affects the NFL and specifically the division. Jeff Hafley was the head football coach at Boston College. He's now the defensive coordinator of the Green Bay Packers. That's a big change because typically you don't see coaches from Power 5 programs leaving those jobs where they're little fiefdoms and they're going to be an assistant coach in the NFL. What's changed? Well, you saw it happen at Buffalo. You saw it happen at South Alabama. Those head coaches left for coordinator jobs at Alabama, and you're going to see it more often. The rise of the NIL and how difficult the transfer portal is to navigate has made being a head coach not all it's cracked up to be. You're developing players in many cases to star at other programs that they transfer to in their 4th and 5th season. So basically what's happening sometimes is, number one, it's hard to just keep everything straight and to get the financing to be competitive. You need a general manager. You need a cap guy in college football. But also, you're basically a minor league development system for the teams that are going to actually make the college football playoff. So if you're Jeff Hafley, for instance, you look at Boston College. If I get my quarterback to the point where he's second team all ACC, he's a senior with 1 year of eligibility remaining, he's not coming back to get you over the top. He's leaving for Clemson to win a national title. So you're going to see more of this happen until they start to regulate these things closer in college football. And Boston College's loss is the Green Bay Packers' gain, because Hafley and Matt LaFleur apparently have a relationship. He was on Dave Wanstead's staff at Pittsburgh. He's a very good football coach, and now he's the Packers DC.
Well, hopefully whoever the Bears choose to play quarterback for them will be able to figure out the defense that Jeff Hafley throws at them, because that's been a problem here throughout the entirety of my time on the Bears beat. No matter who is coordinating the Packers, the Bears tend to struggle to score many points, and they often get outscored by whoever's playing quarterback for the Green Bay Packers.
Well, that was fun. Looking back at our predictions, looking ahead at what's next in the Bears speculation season, and Senior Bowl this weekend. We're only weeks away from the NFL Combine in Indianapolis. There'll be a lot of conversations along the way, a lot of transition tag, franchise tag conversation as it pertains to Jalen Johnson. Anything else, Dan, that we forgot to mention before we get out of here?
I'm going to drop one, since this is a predictions podcast that we revisited, I'm going to drop one prediction here at the end of this episode, and we'll be able to pull this back up in a few months. I'm predicting that the Bears are going to play in the Hall of Fame game in Canton, Ohio, the first week of August. I'm predicting that they're going to have multiple Hall of Famers being enshrined, and they're going to have the number 1 pick in the draft playing, and that the NFL is not going to be able to resist the urge to have buses from Chicago to Canton, Ohio, turning that part of the Midwest into Bears territory for 3 or 4 days. So you heard it here first with that prediction that you better get your credential requests in, David. You better start making your hotel reservations. That's my prediction here on the first day of February.
I love that prediction. I know it's kind of an odd thing, and the season starts even earlier, but in 2018, they played there when Brian Urlacher was inducted. And
Matt Nagy's first preseason game as a coach, too.
That was Matt Nagy's first game, you're right, as the Bears head coach. And I don't even remember who they played, but I remember being there because Urlacher got inducted, and that was quite an event. But you're right.
Javon Wims scored a touchdown in that game. We could look that up.
Javon Wims?
Yeah.
Who did he punch to get past to catch that pass?
That was pre-punching.
That was pre-punching. That's a good call, though, because next week is a big week potentially for the Chicago Bears tradition. You could see as many as 3 former Bears, Julius Peppers, Devin Hester, and, of course, Steve Mongo McMichael, who I think it's going to be a lock. That's going to be a lot of fun to talk about, hopefully, next week when we receive news that people in Chicago.
Keep in mind, that prediction is not self-serving, because that ends my summer a week early, because it means the Bears training camp report date would be a week early, and that's a little bit of a depressing thing for NFL writers to have to abruptly stop things in mid-July. But that's where I see this going.
Canton is lovely in mid-July. It's
such a great place.
It's such a great place. All right, that's a good prediction. I like it. I'll have to think about that, and we'll have to address it next week. So for soothsayer and prescient Adam Studzinski, our producer, and for Dan Wiederer, I'm David Haugh. Thank you for listening to the Take the North podcast on your free Odyssey app. Thank you for watching on 670 The Score on the YouTube page. We will talk to you next week when we'll have more news, speculation, and more predictions. Talk to you then.
Great talk. See you out there.